Yeah, people have joined. Good number of people have joined. Welcome. I think this is an interesting junction of disaster risk and natural resource governance within the space of TFCAs within SADC. So it's really going to be an interesting discussion. I see many of the TFCA practitioners, people we know, people that are well known to the process have joined. This afternoon session is really going to take us through this nexus of disaster risk reduction within the context of TFCAs and the mainstreaming of that. We have got several presenters that will take us through this and give us examples of how this has been done within the space and what contribution it has made. The first request that I have is that in the chat, if you can place your name and your affiliation and organization to your name and your affiliation in the chat so that we can keep a record of that, and feel free just to include any of the discussions or questions you would like so that we can moderate them as we move through the afternoon. That would really be useful, so that we can actually keep track of that. As I mentioned, this is about mainstreaming disaster risk reduction and risk-informed decision within the TFCA space. This is two fields that are both well developed within SADC, some good examples coming out, but not much collaboration and cooperation, which is really the objective of this, to find a way that we can work closer together to be able to increase the resilience within the TFCA space. For the introductory remarks, I'd like to request Madam Nana Glamini, who's the acting head of disaster risk reduction within SADC, to just give us a few words, introductory words about disaster risk reduction and the need for mainstreaming within the TFCA space. Madam Glamini, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to switch on my video, and if the bandwidth is not cooperative, then I will switch it off. But for now, I'm really very humbled to welcome you all to the SADC TFCA webinar on disaster risk reduction and natural resources governance. This webinar is hosted by the SADC TFCA program, implemented in partnership between the SADC Directorate of Food Security, Agriculture, and Natural Resources, together with GIZ, through the Joint Action on Climate Resilience and Natural Resource Management in the SADC region. And it is, of course, commissioned by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, co-funded by the European Union. I must admit that this feels a little full circle moment, because this event today marks a very important milestone for the SADC disaster risk management agenda, as it will allow us to strengthen and promote the integration of disaster risk reduction and in disaster risk informed development in the natural resources management. This collaboration is one of the most natural one, and I might even say one of the most long overdue, because considerations for disaster risks should have been primary in the management of natural resources. One would have thought that it would be one of the most naturally emerging partnerships or collaborations. Nevertheless, I'm very happy that we are here today and the conversation can start. I think we all know that the impacts of climate change, such as droughts, are one of the major threats to the protection of biodiversity. And the SADC region is extremely vulnerable to climate volatility and disaster risks, and the disaster risks that comes with it. The disaster risk profile has been changing quite significantly in the region. We all know that we are a region that was predominantly prone to drought, but when you look at the risk profile now in terms of natural disasters as well as biological and human-induced, such as complex emergencies, it becomes very pertinent to look at risk from a systemic lens, which highlights interdependencies and supports a more coherent nexus. The SADC Disaster Risk Reduction Unit is very important. I mean, it's very committed to advancing the mainstreaming agenda. We are currently developing, we have actually developed guidelines for mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in various sectors, in about 6 sectors. And these include agriculture, transport, water, health, gender, just to name a few. And we are now in a process of developing web-based training modules so that we can help the sectors on how to practically mainstream disaster risk reduction. Because it is one thing to speak risk-informed development. It's one thing to advocate for the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction. But it's another thing to actually be in a position to practically do it. When you are sitting and you are working in your sector, what does mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction look like? This is why we are developing the training modules, and we are hoping that it is going to make it a little easier and will provide a bit more practical guidance on how to mainstream. And therefore, as we journey together in the mainstreaming of DRR in TFCAs, I look forward to learning a lot, both personally and professionally. I must admit that I find the area quite fascinating, but also I am not very proficient in it. And so this is an opportunity for a very, very interesting chapter in my life personally. I can already see some of the areas that the DRR community can learn from within the TFCAs. For example, in the area of management of transboundary risks, we all know that disasters have no borders, but as a community, we are still struggling in the effective management of transboundary risks from both a governance and technical point of view. This is an area where we think we can learn a lot from TFCAs. We know that within natural resources management, TFCAs and RBOs have been a symbol of success, having made it possible for transboundary management of shared resources across member states. The results in this space are full for us all to see, and we hope that the mainstreaming of DRR into the sector will be yet another effort to protect these gains by utilizing the positions these multilateral structures have to fight the threats such as drought, floods, poaching, zoning diseases, and socio-economic ills that continue to destroy the rich natural assets that we have as a region. While we work on the mainstreaming, we also hope to learn from the successes that have been made in the TFCAs. And I hope that the discussions that we are going to have today are a beginning of a glorious relationship and will result in collaborative efforts to build as a resilient region. I hope we conclude the session of today by developing a roadmap that will outline how exactly we are going to collaborate with each other so that what we have started today does not just become an academic exercise, but we can follow up with actions that we can look to and all be proud. Ladies and gentlemen, as we discuss, as we start our meeting today, I wish you all very successful deliberations, and I hope that we are all going to have a productive session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Dlamini. It's really nice that you've laid a great foundation and motivation about why we are meeting this afternoon. To be able to get into the actual meat of the discussion, the depth and understanding of this nexus that we are looking at between disaster risk reduction and risk-informed development within the space of TFCAs, I'd like to introduce Professor Johannes Bell from the University of the Free State, as well as from the Resilient Solutions team that have got extensive knowledge about disaster risk reduction, to be able to give us a background of what are we talking about and how do we bring this into the geographic space that we are working with within TFCAs. Johannes, if you can give us an introduction. I know you've got a good history as a geographer in the background of this, and with your team, with Marcos, to actually address these issues. Please give us your interpretation of how you see disaster risk reduction.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Colleagues, greetings from my side. I hope, am I going to share my screen or are you projecting from that side? Hello?
On Kumeske has got the presentations and he can scroll through.
I think he will flash it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
No. Okay, I think something is coming. Yeah, the screen is coming, but it's the first slide. Can you move? Can it move?
I don't know why it's taking time.
Okay. Or you can log off and I share my own screen. Okay, there we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's now there. So colleagues, I've been given a task here to look at the global overview of DRR, disaster risk reduction, and RID, risk-informed development. Two very close concepts, very, very related. One looking a little bit recent than the other, that is RID coming to the forefront, although it has been there, but it is now taking a central stage in the disaster risk reduction discourse. The next slide, please. The slide is not moving. Okay, so I just felt I should remind ourselves of certain key concepts. The first one being disaster, since we're looking at disaster risk reduction. To look at events that are very, very serious, causing serious loss in lives, destroying infrastructure, especially our critical infrastructure, those infrastructure that we cannot do without, our property, our livelihoods, our environment, it is exceeding the capacity of those affected without outside assistance. And that is what qualifies a disaster, because sometimes we confuse incidents or emergencies with disasters. Just to sum it up, is that every disaster is emergency, but not all emergencies are disasters. And an emergency will be a situation which is not usual, which is not business as usual, which will need that. And maybe you redeploy resources or you devote more time to tackle that. So disaster will have a serious effect and will overwhelm the coping capacity of those who have been affected. So and when we look at the DRR, we are looking at the policies and measures that we are putting in place to prevent or to reduce existing risks and to manage residual risks. These are risks that are remaining after you've put in place all the mitigation measures. Therefore, you need to plan on how to manage them. And in that case, we try to make sure that we strengthen the resilience of the community of or the society. So disaster risk reduction, if you look at the disaster risk continuum, it will be on the pre-disaster aspect of it when we're looking at measures where we're trying to prevent, we're trying to mitigate. And where we are not able to prevent and mitigate, then we have to prepare. And those all constitute our disaster risk reduction. So when we look at disaster risk reduction, it is an emphasis that we have been talking about. If you look at the 90s, we moved from the reactive part of looking at disasters to the proactive part of looking at disaster risk reduction. And this has taken us quite a journey up to where we are today. But in 2015, there are 3 key global frameworks that were talking seriously on disaster risk reduction. We're looking at the Sendai framework that was adopted in 2015, which is actually the yardstick and the commitment by all countries to make sure that we reduce disaster risks. And we're looking at the Paris Agreement, which was also signed in the same year, which is also emphasizing on us to make sure that we reduce disaster risks, especially climate-related risks, which are now almost more than 90% of all the disasters that we are facing in the world. And it is safe to say that we are witnessing increasing intensity and magnitudes of disaster as a result of so many multiplying or amplifying factors. Then we have the Sustainable Development Goals or Agenda 2030, which we all want to make sure that every development that we are putting in place is sustainable. And we see that those we can only realize those sustainable development goals if we make sure that our development is risk informed. So you can start seeing the relationship between disaster risk reduction, sustainable development goals, and the risk informed development concept that is now coming to the fore. The next slide, please. Now let's look at important disaster risk reduction trends. What is there that will be happening in disaster risk reduction and the challenges that we are facing so far? The first one is that there is increasing recognition that climate change is now multiplying our risks. And if you look at most of the risks that we're facing, they are mostly climate related. So we have to make sure that anything that we're doing in disaster risk reduction also takes account of climate change issues. And that is why we are now saying if you are developing and maybe your national adaptation plans, it must make sure that it includes a disaster risk reduction or vice versa. Your disaster risk reduction plans include climate change issues in that. We also see the global shift from a reactive to a proactive form of reducing, of managing disasters in the sense that we're looking at response as being the main focus of disaster. And that shift changed from around the 90s with so many yardstick protocols being agreed upon to the present state where we are looking at the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. But when we look at the funding actually on disaster issues, we will still see that as a challenge. Although we are preaching the proactive aspect of it on focusing on disaster risk reduction, we realize that most often we are more focused or we pay more attention and a lot of resources on disaster response. Another factor, another trend that we're seeing is the growing emphasis on nature-based solutions. And these nature-based solutions are where you are using your natural environment to make sure that you build the resilience of communities. And this is very, very important when we're looking at the TFCAs, because I think it goes exactly to say the TFCAs will play a critical role in advancing nature-based solutions from the ecosystem services that will come from our various TFCA to the local community. Another trend we're seeing is where we're focusing on community-based approaches. We are trying to say, instead of the situation where we were looking at disaster risk reduction from a top-down approach, let's not try to involve the community, make sure that the community is really involved in every aspect that you're doing, which has to do with reducing risks. And the other one, which is very, very central now, is the multi-hazard early warning approach, and also early action as well as anticipatory action, which is now playing so much in the international arena. You see, a few weeks ago, I think in June, we were in Geneva, and this was very, very central from the African perspective right up to Geneva. The multi-hazard early warning was very, very emphasized. But it is not enough to have multi-hazard early warning. It is also very, very important, and it may be more crucial to make sure that there is early action. And if there is no early action, then you'll find that sometimes our early warnings are not very, very effective. And you can see examples like what happened here in South Africa in the floods that happened in KZN. There were early warnings, but because it was not accompanied with early action enough or anticipatory action, then we had a lot of destruction, especially in terms of casualties and property that were destroyed. So we are also looking at early warnings and early action accompanied by anticipatory action. These are triggers that you see, and therefore put in place corrective measures to make sure that the impact of that disaster is really reduced. Then another trend that we're seeing is a growing call for more data and information technology to be used in disaster risk reduction. For example, our satellite images, our artificial intelligence, the use of GIS, risk mapping, and in decision making are all the trends that we're putting in place now to make sure that DRR is more informed by data that we've collected, as well as information technology is helping us to achieve disaster risk reduction. Now, the key challenges, what are we facing as challenges in DRR globally? We see that the low and middle income countries still bear the heavy brunt of disaster impact. That is, the low incomes and the middle income countries are still very, very much affected by a disaster. Therefore, our DRR is not reaching the grassroots in these areas, proportionate when you compare them globally. Then there is also the growing urban risks due to unplanned settlement and emerging risks. You find that right now, a lot of urban sprawls are happening. We are having a lot of informal settlements around major cities. The cities themselves are growing. We know that globally about 60% of the population are now living in cities. Most of our casualties will be based in cities. So now what is happening here, the urban sprawl is bringing another dimension where a lot of informal settlements are coming up, and therefore service is not reaching these areas as fast as they should be. And therefore DRR issues in these areas need to take into consideration this type of dilemma that we are having a lot of informal settlements that are not served by services, and therefore risks in these areas are more advanced. Then there are also emerging risks that are now happening that we should also take note of, because it is not longer business as usual. I think the International Science Council just published a compendium of risks that went up to about 30 risks that are coming up now. We should also put an eye on risks that are emerging that were not traditional risks around. For example, cyber risks are coming up very, very strongly. Then we find limited funding for disaster risk reduction compared to post-disaster response. I think we have already mentioned this, because we've seen that a lot of money is being pumped into disaster response instead of DRR. I think if you look at the percentages of distribution, less than almost 2% of all our funding in humanitarian activities are focused on DRR, and the rest is on response, rehabilitation, recovery, and so forth. Then there is a gap in risk governance, cross-sectorial collaboration, and capacity to handle disaster risks. This is very, very important because we find that in many countries, we're talking about risks, but it is not getting to the grass, to the politics. The politicians are not well informed on what we are doing. And sometimes you find that this brings in a lot of conflict between the practitioners and the policy. And then there is also the capacity. The capacity is not there to advance a DRR, so we need to build a lot of capacity. And then we have also been working so much in silos, and we will see that risk is actually systemic, and therefore the silo approach of it is not very, very conducive. And this is where the TFC will play a very crucial role to make sure that they are not only cross boundaries, but also multi-sectorial approach, or the nexus approach can easily be manifested or shown as an example in our TFCAs. Next slide, please. Now, when we look at risk-informed development, first of all, the concept of risk is coming up here. And we know that risk is the probability of an event happening, and when it happens, it's negative consequences that follows. And whenever we do our risk assessment, which is a starting point for DRR, we make sure that we look at what are the hazards or what are the events that are causing trouble or causing harm, are the people, what is exposed, and then what is the vulnerability of those who are exposed or the assets that are exposed, and what are the coping capacity that we have. So when we look at that, we do that analysis, we come up with the risks. But in risk-informed development, we are looking at development that integrate multi-dimension or dynamic, interdependent, and transnational aspect of risks into the risk-based decision-making process. That is, you make sure that any decision-making process that you are looking at, or any development decision-making process that you are looking at, you put the aspect of risk in that, you incorporate that into the decision-making. And therefore, this will help us to look at, to avoid risks that will affect the development, as well as risks that will come from the development and affect the community. So we try to cut down the risks to development, as well as risks from development to the community. And when we are doing this, then we are looking at risk-informed development. And risk-informed development is very, very crucial, because if you look at maybe in development terms, sometimes disasters are looked upon as negative. But when you bring in development, then it's looked upon as positive. So when we look at disaster risk reduction, it may not be very, very appealing to the politician, but if you look at risk-informed development, then you are looking at risks from a development perspective, and that holds a lot of ground. And that is why risk-informed development is gaining a lot of popularity, both to the practitioners as well as the policy. So you know we have to build this science, policy, practice interface. And this is one area we're seeing that we're having a lot of common grounds that we can easily talk to each other when we use this type of approach in reducing disaster risks. So when we look at risk-informed development, we understand the risks to and the risks from development. We are looking at acting on the knowledge to avoid creating risks through poor development choices. You can make very poor development choices, and that will, instead of bringing development, it will create a lot of risks. For example, we have this continuum, these 4 quadrants where we look at development and disasters, and you look at where development can bring disasters and where disasters can actually impede on development. Then we also support climate change adaptation. I just mentioned this, that in risk-informed development, climate change adaptation is quite central. And we have to make sure that whenever we're looking at development projects, we also bring in the climate change adaptation, and to make development more resilient and sustainable. So if development is not resilient, then it cannot be sustainable. And what makes a development resilient is when we include the aspect of risks into that development process or development decision-making process. The next slide, please. So this slide shows us just that disaster and development are just two faces of the same coin. They are inseparable. And what you have to do here is therefore to make sure that disasters do not, or development does not bring in disasters, and disasters do not really bring down your development processes. So we find that despite progress in disaster risk reduction, we are seeing that we are creating more risks than we are reducing them. So what is the problem? Is it that, or maybe we will now have to look at another component of it to see exactly the development choices that we are making. Are they risk informed, or are we putting development without bringing in the aspect of risks? And this is where we need this paradigm shift to make sure that wherever we are looking at development, whether it be at TFCAs, we are incorporating the aspect of risk reduction in our development. The next slide. Now, why is it that risk is being driven? Why is it that risk is coming up very, very popular globally? The first one is that the first driver of REIT, and don't confuse drivers of REIT and driver of risks. These are drivers of REIT, that is risk-informed development. If one of them is a rising disaster risks and losses that threaten sustainable development gains. This is a realization that a lot of disasters are happening, and they are bringing down some of the development gains that we have already achieved. The second driver is the realization on the systemic nature of risks. At first, we were looking at risks as either multi, or we are looking at a single hazard or single risk, but we are now seeing that risks never come alone. They are interconnected, they are systemic, and they are compounding, and they have cascading impact. So you'll find that something that may start as a drought may end up as riot in the streets. So you need to look at this systemic nature of risks in order to make sure that you solve risks in a holistic perspective. The third one is the funding. On funding partners, for example, the GIZ is quite very, very strong to make sure that all the development projects that they are bringing on board should be risk informed. UNDP is driving REIT seriously. The World Bank has a whole component where it's looking at risk informed development. The Green Climate Fund, looking at how far you have integrating risks into the development projects whenever you're writing even your development projects. Then the fourth one is integration of DRR into development to achieve Agenda 2030. So that is also where the DRR itself now is coming into sustainable development, and therefore it has a very good marriage with REIT. The next slide, please. Now, how do we mainstream REIT? How can we mainstream REIT? One of it is to integrate risk analysis into our national, or REIT into our national policies, planning, budgeting, etc. For example, your national adaptation plan, your disaster risk reduction strategies, you make sure that that brings in the element of risk-informed development. Then also applying climate and disaster risk diagnostic tools. For example, if you're looking at your infrastructure, agriculture, water, energy nexus or projects, you try to bring in these tools. For example, right now we are working on a tool sector specific, which will talk to water, talk to energy, talk to food, talk to natural resources. And inside this sector, various sectorial tools, we are bringing in the risk-informed development, the enabling environment to integrate that into the various sectors. Then also using multi-sectorial approaches. That is the nexus approach that we've been talking about, because you find that these sectors don't work in isolation. Once they are hit by a shock in one sector, it's easy to cascade to another. And these sectors are interrelated in such a way that when we are looking at risks, we should look at them from a multi-sectorial approach. For example, if we have drought, it will affect water, and we need energy, maybe to pump water to agriculture, which produces food. And if we don't look at all these linkages, then we may miss the plot and not plan properly. The fourth area we can integrate is creating enabling environment for REIT, and this framework, the Global Initiative for Disaster Risk Management, Phase 3, together with UNDP, created an enabling environment that we are using, made up of 6 components. We'll see them very soon, that you can now use to see exactly how you can analyze your risk-informed development. Then education and capacity building is also very, very important for us to carry on REIT. And lastly, integrating into project life cycles. Immediately you start the project from inception right to decommissioning, you make sure that the risk-informed aspect or risk-informed decision-making is incorporated in all those phases. Next slide.
Now,
why does
2 minutes and you can wrap up?
Oh, 2 minutes. Oof, okay. Why does REIT matter to the TFCA? You find that the TFCA actually are challenged by so many hazards. For example, climate, environmental degradation. They are operating in vulnerable communities, which needs ecosystem services. There are places where there is conflict, human-wildlife conflict is taking place, and therefore this is very, very important for us to integrate a REIT in the TFCAs. Next slide. Now, we can skip this one for the sake of time. Maybe I have already talked about the systemic nature of risks and the compounding effect of it, which makes it. This is the same thing. We can skip. Maybe let me go to, I have talked about mainstreaming already, so we can skip this as well. This is the risk-informed enabling environment that I was talking about, which has 6 quadrants that you can use for as indicators to assess even your sector to see whether it is risk-informed. And for the TFCA, it is it can be very, very good if we use this framework to look at our integrated development planning. And if you look at these 6 quadrants, you can measure to see exactly how far you have incorporated the idea of risk-informed development or how far you are a little bit away from that. Next slide, please. So when we look at the key messages, and I think this is a take-home message that I would like to leave for everyone who is attending this webinar. And the first message is that risks in the region, the southern region that we're looking at, is actually systemic and is growing. And therefore, we need to make sure that we use a systemic lens to look at risks. And this is going to some sort of challenge our development in the region, as well as the objectives of the TFCAs. The second one is that solutions need to be holistic and collaborative. Gone are the days that will be working in silos. We need to work together. Sectors must come together now to look at how to look at risks. And then the TFCA should try to consider the integrated development plan, how they can bring in the idea of REIT, either now to look at the integrated development plan, or even when they are doing the policies, to make sure that they integrate risk-informed development into the planning. Then we need to strengthen our ecosystem, where we now have to look at nature-based solution, and this is where the TFCA will play a very crucial role to the communities that they are serving, to make sure that they receive good ecosystem-based or ecosystem services. Then we also need to foster cross-sectorial collaboration. I already mentioned this. And then also to emphasize that the TFCA stand as a good model where we can really integrate REIT into its activities, because it is causing a cross-border, and I think the former speakers mentioned it, that risks are not transboundary. And they are not only transboundary, they are cross-sectorial. So the TFCA stand a very good chance to act as a model where we can really include risk-informed development and DRR and showcase that as models for the other sectors or other communities to take on or to look at as good best case studies. For the sake of time, I will leave the presentation here, and if there are any questions, I will gladly answer them. Thank you very much, Chairperson. MC.
Thanks, Johannes. That was excellent to give us a foundation to lay down. I know you skipped over a few slides. They will get picked up, and we will be able to interrogate those later and also in the process over the next few months. You mentioned often the TFCAs and how they can incorporate and play a role in this. And this is where I'd like to call Dr. Nyambe to actually discuss some of the examples out of the Kaza TFCA, a larger landscape. And as a geographer, to pull this in, Nyambe has been looking at the multi-sectoral nature over and above, beyond wildlife, but also looking at forests, looking at water, and looking at various of the other components. So, Nyambe, if you can take us through this, I know your experience is vast and you have incorporated this in the planning processes, both within the countries and at the transboundary level, and in a multi-sectoral approach beyond just the wildlife sector. Over to you, Nyambe.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, allow me to say that what I'm going to present really is not a reflection of what the Kaza Secretariat has done, but actually a reflection of the collective efforts of the partner states of Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and various implementing partners, including international cooperating partners from a funding standpoint. And the central question I'm going to try and speak to is really what's being done in Kaza relevant to disaster risk reduction. And if we can move to the next slide, please. So, colleagues, you appreciate that Kaza is massive, representing about 60% of the TFCAs in the region. So the question of scale is critical. And that is one of the key contributions that TFCAs provide to disaster and risk reduction efforts. Scale and being able to work at a transboundary level, being able to bring in a cross-sectoral approach, and most importantly, being able to implement over a long time the various initiatives. Next slide, please. So that's the vision for Kaza and mission. I just want to draw your attention that to the fact that the vision is very specific on the issue of sustainable development, and when it comes to the mission, and we've just been talking about the opportunities around better coordination and harmonization. So you will notice the last few words related to the mission there. And if I can have the next. Hello, next, yes, please. Yes, and I want to draw your attention to the various objectives of Kaza TFCA as stipulated in the treaty that actually binds the 5 partner states. But if you look at the last one, it speaks specifically to the objective of mainstreaming emerging environmental and social issues in the overall development of Kaza TFCA. And I think this is where also what we are discussing here this afternoon fits in. Next, please. For those that are not aware of Kaza, that's just the map of Kaza. And I think at this moment, I just want to mention that it's quite massive, 520,000 square kilometers, 2 major river basins, the Okavango River, the Kavango River Basin, and of course the Zambezi River Basin, and of course 19 national parks. Next slide. And also very important to mention that when you're talking about Kaza, like other TFCAs, you're essentially talking about, in most cases, multiple land uses. And so Kaza is an excellent example of a mosaic of land uses. But what I'd like to mention here is that these land uses actually, in the case of Kaza, about 70% is wildlife or conservation related. Next slide, please. And just some other highlights that I'll not speak to that are relevant to Kaza. And perhaps maybe just to mention that when we're talking about Kaza, one of the critical aspects is the number of forest reserves and also the number of wildlife management areas. And lastly but not the least, of course, the global significant biodiversity that this landscape is associated with. Next slide, please. So back to the question of what is being done in Kaza. In responding to this question, I just want to say that in reflecting on what has been happening in Kaza over the years, one gets the sense that we are dealing with emergencies, we're dealing with disasters, but also the approach that is being followed, which seeks to ensure effective consideration in our programming, planning, and also policy influencing to facilitate prevention and mitigation, preparedness and reduction of vulnerability, and of course, strengthening of institutional mechanisms. And I would like to give a few examples in the next couple of slides. Next, please. This slide is a kind of a summary of a number of things. I have in the first column just highlighted some of the selected disasters and risks or issues they relate to and some of the work that's been done. So for example, on freshwater resources, the various initiatives that have been undertaken in relation to the Kwango River Basin, which include a strategic environmental assessment and the diagnostic assessment. And as we always say, when it is about freshwater resources in our context, it's also inevitable to look at these resources in the context of climate. Again, there are examples of what's being done in terms of food security and also in terms of biodiversity loss and habitat fragmentation. The picture that you are seeing on top right, that was taken this year, February, was actually a watershed moment when we had land use planners from the various partner states and also those working in the wildlife sector, really trying to see how we can advance the whole idea of integrated land use planning across the landscape. Then there are also issues to do with human-wildlife conflicts, and I'm not going to read what's written there, but basically a whole range of initiatives that are being undertaken by different implementing partners, ranging from awareness creation and also advancing of coexistence, land uses and infrastructure, capacity building. And also when it comes to infrastructure, just to give examples for those that are in Botswana, if you look at Old Matlapana Bridge, multiple objective initiative, human-wildlife conflicts, culture and heritage, and also tourism objectives, as well as basically providing infrastructure in terms of building resilience for the community. If you look at Maitengwe Dam in Zimbabwe, similar arrangement that is helping with tourism, but also critically playing an important role in as far as advancing various objectives for the local communities and tourism development, basically highlighting the need for integration. If you're talking about disease outbreak, the objectives, one of the objectives on Kaza is to do with surveillance of diseases, particularly livestock and veterinary diseases. And the Animal Health Sub-Working Group is doing an excellent piece of work on this subject, working with various experts, trying to advance One Health, and also with the support that was received from the Federal Republic of Germany during the COVID times, we actually were able to implement a COVID relief package. And also as an emergency response this past year, being able to rise to the occasion to respond to the challenge of droughts in southeastern Angola. That's the last bottom picture that you are seeing there. Basically responding to critical situation of hunger and starvation that would have affected a lot of the inhabitants of the southeastern part of Angola, working with the Angolan government, of course. Next slide, please. So there are a number of things that we're doing as CASA Secretariat with various partners, but I just want to speak to the two documents that you are seeing, both supported by USAID, the livelihood diversification strategy and also livelihood focused climate risk assessment. Very important tools for CASA and partners in as far as ensuring harmonization. And also to mention that various partners are implementing initiatives that are supporting livelihoods at the community level, advancing community-based natural resource management efforts. The top picture that you're seeing there is was taken in the Chobe Enclave in Botswana, where we are working with World Crew to promote herding-based models in terms of responding to the challenges around livestock diseases, challenges around human-wildlife conflict, and also at the bottom picture, you're seeing a gentleman holding seed packs. Believe it or not, the seed with the support of WWF Zambia, the seed was and supported by the EU. That seed that you're seeing was grown by local communities, and that gentleman is actually a seed grower. And if we can proceed, please. So when we're talking about freshwater ecosystems and resources in CASA, one thing is very clear, and that is if, as somebody once said, if climate were to be a shark, water would be its teeth. And it's very important in our context in CASA because of our location, because of the two river basins. The area is quite vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And I just want to illustrate some of the work that's been done from a perspective of water and how we are trying to position water, following a ministerial directive to pay particular attention on this, and also the directive of the TFCA steering committee to work very closely with the river basin organizations, that is OCACOM and ZAMCO. Next slide, please. So in 2019, this group of people that you are seeing met and resolved and helped CASA advance the agenda of freshwater. And much of what I'm going to say is actually emanating from the work of this group. Next slide, please. And I think a critical point, and thanks to National Geographic and World Bird Trust for this great photograph, what you're seeing here is a very good image of the freshwater ecosystem starting all the way from the Angolan highlands. And what you're seeing here all the way to the Delta and beyond. And I think what we are learning increasingly is the meaningless of boundaries, the agents of collective action, and also the opportunities offered by SADC in terms of regional scope, the protocols, the treaties, and we also heard this also in the opening remarks. But what I want to say here is SADC provides us with the opportunities to bring everything together. Next slide, please. So when we're talking freshwater resources here, we're talking about the habitats, how the climate adaptation aspects come into the picture, biodiversity, and we're also talking about surface and underground water resources. We're also talking about the issue around flows, quality, timing, and quantity of water, and how all this plays out in as far as affecting people and biodiversity. Next slide, please. And I think the point I'd like to stress here is the shared risks and opportunities. But the shared risks that I really would like to mention include, for example, declining freshwater species, the risk of fragmented and degraded water habitats, and all the other risks that I've highlighted there. And really the point to mention here is that water is everybody's business, and there's the reality of water scarcity and the implications this has in terms of livelihoods and economic impacts, as well as biodiversity. Next slide, please. And when we're thinking about water, there are a number of pressures that give rise to these risks. Without mentioning them individually, what you're seeing in the graphic there is an excellent illustration of what these risks, these pressures are. And think of these pressures alongside population growth, global warming, urban growth, and increasing economic activities. And of course, so private and the public sector financing, and of course, climate change itself. Next slide, please.
Yambi, 2 minutes.
Okay, so what you're seeing here now, colleagues, are just some of the examples of the various initiatives that have been implemented in terms of the Kaza groundwater project, in terms of the freshwater map that we developed, automated water quality monitoring equipment, and also provision of water, both for people and wildlife, and various baseline studies that have been undertaken with different partners, including the Kwandu River Health Scorecard and the others that I've just listed there. And one of the other things that I would like to mention is the strategic environmental assessment, which is at a critical stage in terms of advancement together with OCACOM, rather with ZAMCOM. And I already mentioned the Kaza livelihoods diversification strategy and climate risk assessment. There's a lot of other examples I can give, and I could go on in terms of elaborating on these, but I'll be very happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nyambe. It's always good to see what is happening in Kaza, knowing the magnitude of the work that has been done. I know there's examples that could have been spoken about in terms of the forest risks that you've been addressing in terms of fire, fragmentation, timber exploitation, the disasters that you've been addressing in terms of food security that the animal health sub-working group's working on. There's some wonderful examples, but you elaborated it well, brought it together, and really gave us a good foundation. There's lots to learn. TFCAs are a great space to be able to address these issues, and I think we'll be able to actually get some of that really working on the ground in the other TFCAs, good lessons, good sharing of knowledge, and both the TFCAs and the disaster risk reduction groups can really learn from what's being done within the Kaza TFCA. Just to localize it a bit more, I'd like to invite the next speaker, Mr. Beki Balunga, that will be talking about local adaptation plans in Eswatini, which has been forming part of the disaster risk reduction work within SADC for a while, with some really good examples of what's happening on the ground. So, Becky, if you can take us through this to discuss what has been done in terms of localizing the plans at the subnational level, as well as the work that you've been picking up from COSPI's side. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As I've been introduced, I am Beki Bulunga. I'll be representing the work that has been done by COSPI mainly. The work that I'll be taking us through the local adaptation plans, which is a process that we started in COSPI in 2017. And we've been going through this process together with the communities. Can you go to the next slide, please? The outline of my presentation will be what is the LAP, and I'll go on to talk about the process that we do in the LAP in the communities, then the local adaptation plans in the TFCA. I'll also include Mozambique as well, because we're working mainly in the transfrontier conservation area. So we have also worked in Mozambique as well. Then I will share the results of go through a few challenges that we encounter on the ground, and as well as go through the successes observed in Eswatini. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. What is the LAP? First of all, I'll say thank you to the previous presenters talking about the DRR. I've actually seen the relations between the LAPs and its contribution to the DRR. Let me say one of the issues that led us to work on the local adaptation plans is the issues of climate change. To say climate change is real, there is nothing we can do about it. The only thing that we need to do is to try and adapt and to mitigate where necessary in some cases. So the LAP has some contributions to do in terms of adaptation. The LAP is a participatory and integrated approach that helps communities to identify risks, priorities, and initiatives for adaptation. It is an interactive methodology and it's used for the community to co-design and co-own both the process and the results, which means that we work together with the community. Whatever we do, we start from the community. So it's sort of a bottom-up approach that we are using to say we are engaging the communities, and we let them identify the risks. After identifying the risks, then they prioritize what they think can be done in solving the problems that they have identified themselves. The core objective of this is to reduce vulnerabilities by building the adaptive capacities and resilience within the communities. So the aim is at the end of the day that they themselves must come up with solutions. That's why it is a sort of a bottom-up approach. And what we are promoting is that so the solutions must also come from local resources if possible. There must be minimal external support that is required, but when necessary, external support can be sought. But the bottom the thing is that it must be the solution must come out from the communities. Next slide, please. The overall process leads to development of a local adaptation plan which seeks to integrate resources and experiences in order to strengthen community capacity to adapt to climate change. Most of us here will understand that in the communities we've got different people who have lived in those communities, so they know best about the situations in their communities. So that is why it is imperative that they are involved, and whatever we can find the best solution for adaptation. This LAP, it also contains an action and monitoring plan that is used as a guiding mechanism for all future community development. So then after the local adaptation plan has been developed, which is a document that is finalized and agreed upon by the community, there is then a monitoring plan as to how the activities will be. There's an action plan and then a monitoring plan to say when implementing the activities have to be monitored so that we can understand if they are moving towards the direction that we intend to move towards. Next slide, please. Then I would like to take you through the process of the development of the local adaptation plan. First of all, the first step is to meet the community. First of all, we start with the local authority, where we request and mention our aim as a development agent to say this is what we aim to do, and then we organize the community so that's in a way that it is well represented, and then we sensitize them on the issues of climate change. Briefly state what we intend to do going forward. Then the next step is, which is day number 2, is the creation of a focus group. This focus group is made from the community members coming from different sectors within the community, so that all sectors within the communities are represented. It could be faith-based groups, it could be the traditional healers, it could be farmers. All these groups are represented in this focus group. Then on the after this focus group has been created, then we discuss the adaptation planning training, where we train them on what climate change is, starting from what climate change is, and then how they can adapt into the climate change. Then we go through, after that training, we go into a community validation, where the community will validate the possible solutions that came up during the day number 3. Then on day number 5, we create an action plan and a monitoring plan, whereby we are stating as to how we are going to work together in order to be able to implement the identified solutions. Then after that, on day number 6, which is stage 6, it's a chiefdom meeting, and where we meet the chiefdom for approval. So because this is something that at the beginning we went through the chiefdom to explain our initiative. So again, we need to go to them again for them to approve the plan that has been developed. So this is basically made for ownership, so that the community and its leadership co-own this process. After that, once the chiefdom has approved, then we are calling for it's a presentation to the local authorities, where to the local authorities and the communities, where we are then meeting to share the plan and how it will be monitored and who will be involved, and the roles of the focus group, and how they will need to assist the focus group, which will be taking a lead in the implementation. Next slide, please. Here I am just showing you an example of a community meeting where members are participating during the sensitization, where we are introducing. Next slide, please. Local adaptation plans in the TFCA. Then here I'm going to share what from when we started up to where we are now. The local adaptation plan started in 2017, and at this moment we have created 24 local adaptation plans. Out of these 24, we have completed the whole process, because it's a 7-step process, and after the 7-step process, then you have to start implementing. And usually there is a pilot action, which up to now has been funded through the GIZ project, whereby we're saying after the community have made their plan, there must then be a pilot action sort of that is funded, whereby the communities identify an action that they can do as a way of adaptation. So 15 of these pilot actions have been implemented so far now. There is a monitoring process within the community, in all the communities, to monitor all the stages. This monitoring process involves meetings whereby the communities meet on a regular basis to discuss progress and to see if they are in line with the implementation program that they themselves have set. Next slide, please. The results that we have achieved now at community level shows strengthened community collaboration with stakeholders and development agents, good and effective working relationship and support has also been realized. We've actually tried to link the communities with a number of development agents and also with government ministries as well, because some of the actions that needs to be done are actions that just requires for them to mobilize government and try to get assistance. So that's what some of the things that they are doing at the moment by themselves. We're also giving a little support here and there, but they are leading the process. Then number two, community leading development is now leading development through focus group with support from local authorities. The focus group that I mentioned earlier is the one that is basically responsible for leading the development that has been any development that has been identified through the action plan. So they are leading this development with minimal support from us at the moment. Some of the tangible results that have been achieved include sustainable agriculture practices that have been that have been started in the communities, water sources protections that could include springs, wetlands. We've also done borehole rehabilitations. We are also into promotion of nature conservation and community tourism. These are some of the things that have been achieved thus far, coming from the local adaptation plans.
Becky, 2 minutes.
Next slide. Here I am just showing you some pictures of what has been achieved. Next slide, please. This was a water protection. The project has now been completed. As you can see, they have got fresh drinking water there. Some of the examples, as I've talked about sustainable agriculture, you can see those are those women there. They are with those boxes with seeds, which is locally adapted varieties. They have a seed bank. They are managing their seed banks by themselves, so they don't have to spend money to buy seeds. They are managing their own seeds. There's also agroforestry as well, as you can see there. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'm also showing here an example. I was showing earlier on, I was showing an example of, I think you've skipped a slide there, an example of an early warning, back again. An example, this is an early warning bulletin that we are also working on. It's also a product. Can you go next again? We have a monthly bulletin, which is also a product of this. Here, these are some of the results of, as I've talked about, ecotourism. We have got ecotourism on the above pictures. We have in Goba, Mozambique, there is a camp that has been developed, a campsite that has been developed on the Mozambican side in Goba. And in Eswatini, we've got a group that is processing products, which is Lubombo Eco Products. They are processing products for which is a business for them as a way of adaptation. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that have been faced includes capacity to upscale local adaptation plans nationwide. There is need to have capacity if we are to upscale it. The other one is the LAP implementation and monitoring requires resources. So there's need to mobilize more resources. Some adaptation measures require high capital investment. Local adaptation plans will need to be reviewed in at least 3 years. This will require funds. Basically, these are funds required. Next slide. Then towards the end, sustaining the LAPs, we have to harmonize priorities across the regions, and national level is imperative to ensure a cohesive and whole society and whole government climate action in Eswatini. We need adaptation finance strategy. Then the other one is support communities to implement their LAP action and monitoring plans. There is need to support this. Next slide, please. This is the monitoring and review, which is establishing a monitoring system and with indicators, targets, and tools, and building capacity for its implementation. Next slide. Success stories observed in Eswatini. In Eswatini, we have a local adaptation framework, which is somehow a framework that is developed. The plan is that all development partners should ride onto this development, onto this framework, so that we can have one approach as a nation, because at the moment, everyone is doing a bit here and there, but we want to have a framework, and we are working together with the relevant ministry, which is Ministry of Tourism and Environmental Affairs. We've got their buy-in into this. We are working on the process all together. The whole objective is to align everything to the National Adaptation Plan, which is still at its infancy stage. Next slide, which I hope is the last one. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. That was excellent, bringing it, right down to the ground. And I really like the approach in terms of the interactive community resilience that's being built through this process. We've got a few minutes in terms of clarifications and questions, and I'd like to just ask a question to Professor Johannes Bell in terms of the frameworks that were set in the DRR space, with the two examples now out of Kaza and out of Lubombo. What do you see as the most crucial linkages that we could develop to be able to bring the DRR methodology and frameworks into the TFCA space at the levels that Nyambi spoke about, as well as what Becky spoke about? Johannes, if you could just elaborate on that one question that I would like some clarity on.
Thank you, Chair. I think they're all doing the right things in their own way. And I think the focus should always be building community resilience. If you look at what Becky is doing, it is some sort of a bottom-up approach, which is very, very important. And I think as TFCAs, that should be greatly encouraged, because you are working with the community who are living in that environment. They have a lot of indigenous knowledge that can be tapped into. If you tap that and you bring it into your conservation framework, it's going to resonate so much with them, and they are going to have a lot of buy-in. I think, like I mentioned again, we can play a very critical role as TFCAs if we champion the nature-based approach to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, because we already have the tool, and all we have to do is to promote that aspect of it. Good enough, the community, the whole world is now embracing that, and we can use that and drive it to the maximum. So I think there is a lot of win-win, no regret in this type of approach. But in all, I think we are doing the right things, and maybe we just need to learn good example in one area and then copy it to another, so that this type of webinar is very, very important, because I gathered a lot from what Dr. Nyambi presented, and especially with what Becky presented in the lab approaches, which is actually a DRR approach.
Thanks. The next question is for Nyambi, that I would like to just look at, the examples coming out of Lubombo TFCA. They're community-based, it is local levels on the ground. What does the future look like within a space like the Kaza TFCA, which is massive, huge, and complex? How do you see the future of the integration of DRR, risk-informed development, within the Kaza TFCA?
Thank you very much for that. First and foremost, just to say that I did not get a chance to speak to what is the many things happening at the local level. I tried to keep it at a higher level as requested, mainly to be relevant to the CASA mission and the focus on harmonization of policy, strategies, and practices. That said, I think quite a lot is going to be is happening in the space of on the ground interventions. I gave the example of community-based natural resource management initiatives. We cannot divorce DRR from community-led and focused interventions in various aspects. And a critical component also is the critical role of local authorities. Just a few weeks ago, for example, we had the opportunity of meeting with the Chobe District Council, the councillors and the executive, ready to understand what could be done in terms of supporting their work in that space. And the upcoming work in terms of what's being planned in CASA, in terms of nature-based solutions with the support of the EU, Natural Africa, that all is also going to go in the direction of strengthening local level interventions ultimately. Yeah, but I'm very happy to also engage bilaterally. I do realize there isn't enough time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, it is good, Nyambe. I know lots is happening. It's a complex space. There really are many components that need addressing. So we will discuss it. I think as we also develop the Madam Glamini's request about mainstreaming, bringing these in, really will become quite an important component that we will be able to pick up. I see there are some questions coming in about interesting to understand the conflict DRR planning at the Selous Nyasa TFCA or Nyasa Selous. I know there's a lot happening there in social components. There's forestry work, there is work being done on food security components, a lot of work around the ownership and governance, and some excellent work that is being picked up, but that will also be detailed and discussed. Carl, I see your question specifically pertaining to that we could pick up bilaterally, and as we go forward, there are detailed plans that will be developed and pulled into this as part of the integrated development planning framework for Nyasa Selous that is currently being developed, that could elaborate on many of those details. There are some strong interventions around the forest fires, water quality and purity that is being picked up within that TFCA. We started earlier today with Madam Glamini specifically talking about mainstreaming of DRR into the TFCA planning space, which does bring it back into the components around. Most of the TFCAs are busy with various components of integrated planning, detailed planning, components, sectoral plans as well, that is bringing the TFCA space, looking at risk-informed development, and also looking at what Johannes mentioned is the risks from development of the TFCA space, as well as the risks to the TFCA components in terms of what happens when roads are developed, when climate change comes through, when there are floods, droughts, when the cyclones blow in and create disturbance within these spaces, how is that picked up? And then also looking very validly at some of the role that TFCAs can play in regional peace and stability, one of the underlying fundamentals that has been built into the whole TFCA design, the TFCA objectives within SADC, that we will also pick up as we develop this component going forward. We will look at that. Krista, I see your question coming in around looking at some of the economic impacts and assessments around hazards and what they actually cost within the TFCA space. It definitely would be a nice one. It's a valid question. We can definitely look at that. I think it's very valid to actually look at the costs as well as also the contribution that TFCAs can make in terms of positive impacts in terms of ecosystem services and the entire value chain that TFCAs can offer in terms of mitigating the risks and contributing towards stability, with building that resilience that has been mentioned at the various scales. Johannes mentioned it at the broad scale. Nyambi's mentioned it at the TFCA scale, large landscape scale, and Becky's spoken about building resilience at the community scale, at the village level, how those can all be brought through. But those nature-based solutions, the value of them in terms of intact habitats can actually become a wonderful study, and we can definitely look at that component when we look at mainstreaming, because it needs to be quantified. It was looked at. I don't know if you've had insight into the value of TFCA's study that was undertaken a few years back that did look at some of the components of quantification of the value of TFCAs, but to actually break it down into the impacts of various hazards and what they actually cost the region would be a wonderful, insightful opportunity to look at. I would like to ask, Steve Collins from the network component to actually address some of these aspects of mainstreaming and how the DRR and TFCA development space can become closer so that we can actually drill into that component. I think it would be a great opportunity to start addressing some of these questions that are coming up, and there will be further engagements to take the process forward. Steve, if you'd like to just address some of these aspects.
Thanks, Paul. I wasn't expecting that, but thank you for the question. And I'll be brief because I know that we have this thing on until 4 o'clock. To say one thing on the TFCA portal, we certainly are going to be listing all the documents and the slides, and we're going to try and, I suppose, increase knowledge about how to incorporate thinking around mitigating disasters, etc., can be built into all the different aspects, from running a tourist operation to issues of drought, community resilience on agriculture, etc. We would, I think, be having more of these kinds of webinars. I think from the DRR perspective, there is going to be a further engagement and training hopefully offered on how, if you're doing planning, to ask the questions and come with answers that hopefully can implement some of the ideas that you see being implemented at CASA. At some stage, there people thought, how do we do this? So, and they're now implementing it. So we certainly would also be trying to upscale some of the work that is being done at a CASA level. Once again, using the network to share knowledge, share tools, put those documents the reports that they are generating onto the portal. And I think one exciting development which is taking place is there's a lot more discussion happening between river basin organizations and TFCAs and the infrastructure unit, etc., about how to make sure we don't work in silos once again, that the water monitoring that has been done at a TFCA level, land use monitoring that's happening at a TFCA level, can inform the river basin organizations and vice versa. So we heard mention about nature-based solutions, and I think the TFCAs are a nature-based solution if we are able to manage that land effectively, etc. So I won't go on further, but thank you very much for this and for the participants. And we will put the slides up, and we will put the recording of this up on our YouTube channel within a week. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. That's great. I think mentioning the river-based organizations, as well as mentioning that the forest sector is also addressing many of these through the Maputo Declaration, looking at the Miombo, various components around that. So I think the integration and multi-sectoral nature of addressing TFCA development and addressing it within risk-informed development is actually coming great together, and we can actually take things forward. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating. It was a good participation. I think it is opening an opportunity for a lot more discussion, a lot more opportunity for answering some of the questions, as well as bringing the various sectors together, the wildlife sector, the planning sector, as well as the policy. And looking at that, what Johannes mentioned in his presentation around science, policy, and practice, and bringing those three components together, we can actually achieve significant change within this space. And I thank you all for being part of it, and we will pick it up as we go forward. So it's a good afternoon, and thanks for participating. Okay, thanks, Umkometi.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.